Okay, so I'm Dan McDonald. I'm the manager of the Sustainability Metrics Group within Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and one of our responsibilities is greenhouse gas modeling. That is a core piece of the Canada's national inventory reporting. So we work very closely with Environment Canada on that. So I thank you very much for inviting me to present. I'm going to try to give you a bit of an overview of things. Is this thing going to work for me? There we go. So I'll give you a bit of an overview of national inventory reporting, and then some of the modeling that we do in support of that. And I'll try to use one of the models as a bit of an example, so that we can get a little more detail into how that gets done and how that gets put together, and talk a little bit about the data needs, the data requirements that we currently have. So the National Inventory Report on Greenhouse Gas, the full title is Greenhouse Gas Sources and Sinks in Canada. So this is Canada's annual submission to the UNFCCC. It's as part of a signatory. It's a requirement that we provide this annual report. And the reporting that we do follows the IPCC guidelines that are set out and in order to give something that we can compare, something is comparable across nations. So agriculture shows up in two chapters within that report, in the agriculture chapter, but it also shows up in the land use change, and forestry chapter, and that's where we deal with carbon sequestration and as a result of land use change. The modeling itself takes into account methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. Those are the principal gases that are reported on. But within all of those gases, there are other emissions that also contribute to that. Things like ammonia that we have to take into consideration as well. So it's all part of that. So to get into a little more detail, I'll talk about the carbon modeling to be a little more specific on some of these things. The modeling, and all of our modeling within sustainability metrics, follows the spatial framework of using Soil Landscapes of Canada as our primary analysis unit. And that Soil Landscapes of Canada nest within the overall ecostratification, so it's very easy for us to speak along the lines of eco districts, eco regions, or eco zones. And the reporting actually gets done at the eco zone, actually what they call reconciliation units, which are eco zones split along provincial lines. Within the SLCs, there are about 3,500 polygons. Within those polygons, there's about 6,000, close to 6,000 landscapes, and there are 30,000 soil components. And the actual calculations that are done at that soil component level. So that's we calculate for each of the soils within the SLCs. The basic premise behind the carbon modeling is that the soil carbon is in equilibrium until a change is introduced to that soil. So in the example on the screen is a soil in equilibrium. That initial cultivation, we start to see an exponential change. It changes, the rate of change changes per year until we meet that equilibrium again, or until another management change is introduced. The current modeling is done on a factor basis. So those factors are essentially applied to the net area of change within that land use. So a change from annual cropping to perennial cropping, There's a factor that has been calculated and developed through other modeling in order to capture what that change is, and then that is aggregated for the SLC within that. And this is all implemented using the Canadian Agriculture Greenhouse Gas Monitoring and Accounting and Reporting System. And from now on, I will call it CanAgMars if I refer to it, because that's kind of a mouthful and it's kind of hard to say on a regular basis. So CanAgMars was developed in collaboration with Environment Canada and Natural Resources Canada, the Canadian Forestry Service, in order to capture the changes in carbon as a result of land use change. The factors themselves were originally generated using the century models, as well as looking at empirical studies. And those factors change as time goes on. So we have to look at change as a result of time as well. Yeah. What we currently measure within this is the change of some of the practices we include changes in tillage intensity. So changing from a conventional tillage to a conservation tillage or to a zero tillage, that will affect the rate of change of carbon in the soil. We now take into account annual crop productivity, which was introduced in the last year. So as yield goes up, biomass goes up, so carbon added back to the soil goes up. And we now are able to capture that within our modeling. Manure application is also added in in recent years, as well as switches between annual and perennial cropping is another one that we include, and the perennial woody crops from fruit trees and grapes. So within that crop category, but not necessarily wild trees and things like shelter belts and riparian areas are not currently captured. But that is something that we are currently working on. So the woody biomass change is one that we are trying to capture within that, as well as looking at crop mixes. So different crops have different below ground biomass, for example, that we're trying to incorporate those different crops within the differences between crops into the mix as well. Cover crops is another one that we're looking at ways of including that in our modeling, as well as grassland management. For those of you who follow the NIR on a regular basis, you will have seen last year that we introduced a fairly significant change to the methodology, and it changed the way our emissions looked through the past the past from 1990 onwards. So the changes that we introduced, a significant change to the nitrous oxide emissions factors. This was based on work that Rochette did 2018 that took into account new studies since the last time that emission factor had been changed. And then further to that, Chang developed the methodology for that, and there's another paper, 2020 study from Chang, who discussed how we implement those changes. Other changes was incorporating the cropland productivity. So taking into account the fact that yields have gone up significantly over time, and with that increase in yield is increased biomass, and so that's increased carbon inputs into the soil. And then manure had been taken into account from the nitrogen standpoint, but had never been taken into account from the carbon standpoint. So through a meta-analysis by Liang, we were able to develop the factors for that manure additions as well. Overall, the changes resulted in emissions dropping, N2O emissions dropping by 4 to 5 megatons of carbon CO2 equivalents, as well as increasing the removals of CO2 on average 5 megatons over the time series, and since 2010, 10 megatons. So those are fairly significant changes. So the data that goes into this, in doing this modeling, what we have to take into consideration is we have to account for all of the activities and the change in the adoption of practices since 1990. If we can, I guess 2005 being the Paris Agreement is our current benchmark, but we always try to project back to 1990 in some way, shape, or form. So it needs to be able to backcast to 1990. The other thing that we have to take into consideration for our data is it has to take into account all of the activity across the country, or at least to take into that all of the activity where in that region where that activity actually takes place. So those are fairly significant data challenges for us in order to get to those. The other consideration we need to do to add practices to this, we have to have an emissions factor. We need to know the significance of that practice change on carbon stocks or on other emissions, nitrous oxide or methane. So what is the result of implementing that across the country at the rate that it has been adopted? So currently, as I said, our data sources are national in scope. So we use Agricultural Census and other Stats Canada surveys. So these are authoritative data sources that we can use and we can rely on, and we can understand what the impact of those changes are. Our soils are, as I said, the Soil Landscapes of Canada is our source, and then we get data from CFS as well as using Earth observation. In future, we're trying to do more with Earth observation, especially those. There are some practices we can see from space, but there are also some practices that the only way we can get the information is by asking. So data needs for things for practices that we're hoping to include, things like cover crop or woody biomass. We need to create that data that allows us to account for changes within the practices on the farm. And to find a data source that allows us to do that, but also to capture that time series for that all the way back to 2005, if possible. So that brings me to the end, I guess, of what I had hoped to present to you. I think we can, in summary, our models are currently being worked on. We have a significant project on carbon modeling and hoping to implement some new changes with that, and implementing additional carbon models to add to the accuracy of our estimates. So there are continuous projects that are allowing us to do this. We also are continually looking at ways to try to improve our input data into these. The opportunities that exist, I think, for living labs, the best opportunity is if there are studies on practices and that can be published. So the more peer-reviewed Canadian studies that we can on, the more varied landscapes, the better information we will have in order to develop those emissions factors. And if there is some way that those living labs can help us to understand what the adoption rates are and to improve those adoption rates. I think that's also data that we would be looking to try to capture within our own processes. So with that, I think I'll thank you, and I don't know if we have questions or.
Great presentation, super helpful. I wonder if you, this is Sean Smuckler from UBC. I'm wondering if you could give us some insight on what others might be doing to develop the activity data for cover crops, for example, going into the past. So I think we can come up with strategies on how to do it into the future, but you got any tips on what those strategies are going backwards?
So cover crops is one that we think we can see from space. So that's we do have a project with some of our researchers, our remote sensing researchers in Ottawa, who are looking to try to understand cover crops from space. So they're looking to be able to backcast that on the current data that exists back to 19. Well, actually to 2000. I think we can go back fairly readily if we use things like MODIS data. So that's how we're hoping to be able to do that. That gives us back to 2005. And then from 2005, we would have to backcast based on some other means. Other means that we can backcast, there are questions. I don't know how recent the questions are in the census. Simple yes/no question on whether they do cover crops. That informs us in some way or another, but I think that's kind of what we're looking at. We also have farm management survey and farm environmental management survey that we may be able to, and we're hoping to be able to do that, to link that data to other census data, so that we can start to I think add some quantities to questions that are simply yes/no. So we have a few projects in the works, but we are also always open to suggestions and collaborations on those things.
Great, thank you. Yeah, this was one of the questions that came up in our discussions yesterday, was just around not knowing what role cover crops are playing in the nutrient cycle, and I'm just seeing, is there a question there from Emma?
Yeah.
No, I don't have a question. I just was trying to support Dan's statement that the yes/no on the cover cropping is still in the census. So every 5 years we have at least the information whether who has done it or not. But there are requests being made for futures, but it's not going to help going to the past. But to have it be more detailed, like the land area on which the cover crops are applied or what specifically is applied, but that hasn't been changed yet. It's more of a comment.
Yeah, that's actually a really helpful comment, though, that like in the future there is a discussion around refining the agricultural census information that will be collected.
And that's a really good point. Thank you for that, Emma. One of the other projects is to significantly improve how we ask questions, and also get a little more buy-in from producers as far as answering the questions. I think farmers are the most surveyed group in the world at this point. So to get them to fully understand and try to refine how we do it, so we don't have to ask them so many times as well. I think there's ways that we can do better, both for ourselves and for them.
Yeah, those are really good points. Are there other questions? Yeah, Sarah Louise, do you want to introduce yourself and then ask the question?
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Sarah Louise Bruder from UBC. I have a question about how the CanAg Mars relates to any carbon credit or monetization or measurement from the government perspective.
So
Yeah.
CanAg Mars is not, I think, detailed enough for the measurement for carbon credits. For carbon credits, we would have to be we're doing calculations for entire soil landscape polygons. So for a farmer, they're not going to be able to take credit for that themselves. So I think there are other ways they can do that. There's been some talk with using things like holos for that, but again, even at that point, you have to take into account much more detail for that. I think the requirements for that are quite strict. I'm not fully versed on those the requirements for that, but I know that our own modeling right now is not detailed enough. We don't have that kind of granularity to be able to do that.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. Kevin Custom, Light Farm, UBC. I was just curious for the input data sets and kind of the outputs of your model. Are those available programmatically in any way such that we could retrieve the latest results rather than downloading a whole data set and incorporating it into whatever we're building and then it being out of date?
We haven't made the input data sets available. We have talked about it, and I think it would be a useful thing for us to do. But we can provide the input data and the models themselves, like the code for those models themselves. Most of the models are written in R. They're fairly easy to deal with. They are they're not spatially specific. They're spatially referenced. So they are. But I think we can make those available if people are interested in seeing what's involved with the modeling of that.
Awesome. So there could be a future where you could pass in a polygon and essentially get the results for that particular area.
Oh, that would be nice if we could actually have it online where you could pass your data in, but some of that is quite difficult to do from a government standpoint and government security and those sorts of things. But I think there's opportunity for collaboration on some of those things if we wanted to do some of that. Then there's also for some of those things that are more specific and more the Holos model that Roland Kreibel puts together is completely aligned with our models. Actually, that's not true. He's a little ahead on some things in his models that we look to try to incorporate in our own as well. But he is aligned with the inventory modeling, and so that might be a better option and an easier way to deal with it rather than trying to deal with something that's looking for a national data set. But I think there are ways that we could help you to understand what the inventory would say about a practice in comparison to what other modeling would say.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the group? Yeah, go for it, Sean.
Sorry.
We lost it.
I'm still here, don't worry. He can hear you.
Okay, good. Sean, again, another tricky but super important one that we need to think about in terms of activity data is fertilizer use.
Mm-hmm.
Got any thoughts on that one?
That's been a bane of my existence for about 2 years now. Yeah, and we're looking at ways of trying to use that. We do have the farm management survey and farm environmental management survey, which are linked but not the same. That gives us some of those, but we are really looking at our nitrogen modeling and trying to incorporate those nitrogen management practices as much as we can. Those that we can calculate. Some things at our scale, things like precision farming. Those things are very hard for us to be able to incorporate, just simply the scale that we're dealing with. But in, emission, the enhanced efficiency fertilizers and those sorts of things are something that if we can get data, and we're looking at ways to try to get data for those, we should be able to begin to accommodate those and put those into place. But it is a challenge, but it is one that we're trying to take on right now. We're actually currently hiring postdocs to try to dig into that, both developing the emissions factors for them, as well as the activity data.
Great, thank you. You know, one thing for me that kind of comes to mind is that, you know, you're talking about how there is research going on now trying to improve emissions factors, particularly around those practices like cover cropping that are, you know, being supported federally for climate-friendly agricultural practices. And I'm assuming, you know, there's like in process research going on that hasn't yet hit the publication stage. And, you know, maybe one of the things as part of the Living Labs program that could take place from AFC is sort of bringing together some presentations around that in-process research that could be shared across the country. Because it is hard when you're outside of AFC to know what all is going on, and you have so much research taking place across the country. So I think that would actually be really helpful for all the people working on the Living Labs across the country to have more insight into some of the in-process work, and I think that could really inform some of what we're doing here.
I will say we're not picky about who does the research. It just there's lots of really good academic research that's going on as well, that we're trying to incorporate as much as we can as well. It's just needs to be out there in the world for us to be able to pull it in and add it to our meta-analysis, and we're always looking to try to improve that, you know, the knowledge that we have on that. So yeah, I think collaboration, the more we can collaborate with across all of the researchers, there's not enough researchers to do it, so the more we can work together and share back and forth, I think the better off we're going to be.
Yeah, thanks. And I also appreciate your emphasis on the need to have the peer-reviewed research so that you can bring it into your meta-analysis and use that to help develop the emissions factors.
Yeah,
that's helpful. It's been a tension in the Living Lab too around, you know, the producer engaged research versus the publication, and we want to do both. So it's good to have that reinforced that that's also really important for these bigger goals.
Yeah. And I think from Living Lab, the other part of Living Labs is to get we can understand the impact of the Living Labs on the adoption rates across the country. That will be a nice piece of information as well, so that we can understand and start to incorporate that sort of data into our activity data that really drives a lot of these emissions.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for joining us and for presenting. We're going to now switch to our next presenter, but Deb, if you'd like to stay on, it would be great. We're going to be talking about some of the provincial level emissions reporting. So maybe this is of interest to you, but if you have to go, that's fine too. Thank you so much for making the time and joining us here this morning virtually.
You're very welcome. I think I will listen to the next presentation for sure.